Greetings everyone, Melderon here. Today I'll talk about a topic that isn't well understood by most of the player base, but is important to all classes and roles, not just healers. That topic is pre-hotting. If we define it, it's an intentional usage of a healing over time effect either on yourself or a party member while you, or the party member is out of combat but is about to enter combat. The benefit of pre-hotting is that the hot placed on you or your party member allows healers to get a leg up on incoming damage. And if you're a druid tank, it has an additional benefit by increasing the threat they generate during the pull as the healing threat is additional to the damage threat. These all sound like great benefits and something players should do all the time. However, there exists complexities and many idiosyncrasies to pre-hotting that even myself and the rest of the people involved in making this video did not fully understand before sufficient testing on the Classic WoW beta. So it is my hope that this video will help educate not only healers, but tanks and DPS as well on when to use pre-hotting and when not to, and its rather interesting threat mechanics. There are only two classes that can actually pre-hot, the Priest and the Druid. Priests have Renew as a healing over time effect and Power Word Shield, which is iffy in most situations as most tanks will be warriors and druids, and this ability can greatly hinder their rage generation as they are not taking damage while it's active. So we will table this. Now for druids. They have two healing over time abilities, Regrowth, which has a static heal plus a healing over time portion, and Rejuvenation, which is a standard healing over time spell. As stated previously, the reasons you may want to pre-hot vary. Primarily though, it's to provide some insurance on a tank during a time that can be stressful, the pull. But if you are a private server veteran, haven't played vanilla in many years, or never played vanilla or classic WoW, you likely don't know the full story on how pre-hotting works when it comes to threat generation. Even on the threat guide that exists on this channel and on ClassicWoW.live, written by Taladrill and based on the work of Kenko, I stated in the video that you do not want to pre-hot a tank considering that any additional mobs he or she is attacking will come to you, the healer, as the tank does not have any threat on those mobs right after the pull, which can be very stressful. However, thanks to the incessant prodding of our friend Taladrill and the testing in both Defcamp and Thermophile, we've uncovered how pre-hotting will work in Classic WoW. Since pre-hotting's threat only comes into effect when in a group, there are three major game modes we need to talk about when discussing this topic: out in the open world, in a dungeon, and in a raid. The latter two are a bit more complicated than the first, so we'll go over out in the world first, and then cover the caveats that occur when in a dungeon or a raid. Before we go any further, let's first go over how healing generates threat. Healing generates threat at a 0.5x rate, meaning that half of the amount healed gets added to the mob's threat table under the healer's name. That's right, threat for each mob is added for each player in a table. So if you heal a tank for 100 health and he's attacking one mob, 100 is divided by 2 and 50 threat is added to the threat table under your name. However, healing threat is evenly distributed among all mobs you're in combat with. If we use the previous scenario, where you heal the tank for 100, it still gets divided by 50 to get the total threat, but then the amount is also divided by 3 because you are fighting 3 mobs. This generates approximately 17 threat, which is added to each mob's threat table under the healer's name. This is why it's smart to top off a tank before they pull and not directly after, as he or she will only have threat on the mob they are currently attacking. If the tank hasn't attacked the other 2 mobs, or no one else has, that threat from the heal will cause the mobs to attack you. 2 quick caveats: any overhealing does not generate any threat, so the amount you overheal for will not be added to the mob's threat tables. And 2, paladin healers generate less threat than other healers, but since they don't pre-hot, that is beyond the scope of this video. If you want to learn more about threat, check out our threat guide on this channel or on ClassicWoW.live. Links will be in the description below. We are now going to go over a series of video clips and situations that will cover all of the complexity of pre-hotting, when it does cause threat, when it doesn't, how it affects when you enter a state of combat, and our recommendations of when to use it. In the first video, you will see that I take a considerable amount of damage because remember, overhealing does not generate threat. After Defcamp kills the mob that was attacking me, we drop combat and he renews me. Since I am not in combat, no one is generating any threat. Then I enter combat with 2 hated mobs. The renew is still ticking and theoretically generating threat. Notice I do not hit the target. However, Defcamp is not flagged for combat. We can see this again in the clip where a similar set of events happens and Defcamp is literally standing inside of the mob and not entering combat. In the next video, we do a similar setup and Defcamp again does not enter combat, but this time we let the entirety of the renew tick off and Defcamp again renews me. As soon as the new renew applies, before it ticks, he enters combat, and then pulls aggro on the mobs on the first tick. So the first renew did not generate any threat, but the second one did. This means that as a healer, if you are out of combat, if the entirety of your healing over time elapses and you are still not in combat, that threat is wiped. We also have a negative control in which Defcamp head pulls without any renew on either me or himself, and I pull off of him with a miss, which makes me enter combat, but it also gives me aggro on that mob. Now this was unexpected, as a missed swing actually pulls more threat, quote unquote, than head pulling does. This clip gives more credence to giving your tanks a few seconds before going ham on them. Well, this is pretty clear. I think we're done here. Healers, pre-hot as much as you like in Classic WoW. Thanks for watching. Come on guys, you know me better than that. When it comes to pre-hotting and the threat it can produce, and when you enter combat, those two words that always come back to haunt us return. It depends. Those few clips clearly show that when out in the world, a healer can pre-hot without worrying about entering combat. However, there are other things we can test. For one, what happens to that threat the heal over time should be accruing? Does it even exist? In fact, it does. And this one, Druid tanks will want to pay attention to. Defcamp gets himself to low health and pre-hots with a max rank renew. Lets it tick once outside of combat and then enters combat, and I cannot pull off of him. This means that a pre-hot done outside of combat by the healer can still transfer threat to the mob when entering combat. The tick that happened outside of combat did not generate threat, but as soon as Defcamp enters combat, the renew heals will start accruing threat. This is important mostly for Druid tanks that pre-hot before engaging. We also did this with a renew rank 1, and you can see that it takes 2 hits for me to pull off Defcamp. This of course makes sense, as the max rank renew produced more threat, but we wanted to cover all bases. In this video, Defcamp renews Thermophile, and Thermo enters combat by head pulling. No damage is being put out by Thermo. While renew is ticking, you will notice that Defcamp misses an auto attack and pulls threat immediately. This is no surprise, as we showed this with Melderon in the control video. However, Thermo attacks the Raptor multiple times and it does not go on him. Defcamp missed his first attack, got dodged the second, while Thermo is producing threat via attacks and hits. If renew is not generating threat, then Thermo should easily pull the Raptor back. This does not happen, meaning that renew is banking threat attributed to Defcamp, even if Defcamp is not in combat. We will come back to this later. We can keep exploring this topic. In this video, Defcamp pre-hots Thermo and Defcamp enters combat. The hypothesis here is that Defcamp should be gaining threat from his renew on Thermo, but when Thermo enters combat, one auto attack and the Raptor turns to him. This isn't surprising, as since Thermo was out of combat, the Raptor didn't see, quote unquote, that threat. Again, we wanted to cover all bases. Here is another example. Same setup. Thermo misses the croc and pulls off Defcamp, but as soon as the renew ticks again, Defcamp regains threat. This means that threat from pre-hotting stacks on the healer only if the person being healed is in combat. In the next clip, we wanted to see if Defcamp is in combat, can he drag another player in combat by hotting or healing them? And he cannot, as you can see. Thermo does not enter combat unless he attacks the target. The last test was to determine if 2 different aggro tables can exist in a party, and this can occur from watching this clip. In the video, Thermo gets a renew, and Defcamp engages Skull, while Thermo engages a different mob, Square. The renew heals Thermo twice while both Defcamp and himself are in combat. However, threat of the 2 mobs attacking Thermo did not transfer to Defcamp. This occurs because Defcamp has not entered the threat table of those 2 mobs attacking Thermo. The renew is banking threat, but it doesn't know who to attribute it to. So from these tests, we can confirm a number of rules for pre-hotting under certain assumptions. The main one being that you and your party are in the open world. 1. Pre-hotting another player does not put the healer in combat unless the healer attacks the target or heals that other player when they are in combat. 2. If a player pre-hots themselves while they are out of combat, those hots will start to accrue threat when they enter combat, as long as they are not over-healing themselves. This is important for Druid tanks. 3. Pre-hots placed by a healer on a player out of combat will start to accrue threat as soon as that player enters combat under some placeholder name, which we'll call unknown. As long as the hot is still active when the healer enters combat, the threat from that hot is then transferred to the healer. 4. If a healer is in combat, they cannot drag another player who is out of combat into combat by healing them. And lastly, number 5, if you, as the healer or any player, are in combat with a different mob than your other party member, pre-hots casted by you on that player will not generate threat under your name on the mobs he is in combat with unless you enter the aggro tables of those mobs. I know that's a lot, so pause the video if you'd like to read through these again and watch the clips again if you're still unsure. Now there's one other fact we can figure out from this testing, and it has to do mostly with tanks. Head pulling definitely gathers mobs' attention, but the tank effectively has no threat, and misses, dodges, and likely even resists will pull off the tank. Give your tank a few moments before engaging, and this shows that head pulling really is never a good idea. Use ranged weapons and abilities to pull mobs. Before we end, there are two very important things to talk about: dungeons and raids. As I stated previously, I said I would come back to these because dungeons and raids are special for two reasons. The first is proximity threat and aggro pulses. Both in dungeons and raids, you can be put into combat if you are too close to party members who are in combat. As you can see in this clip, I enter combat as soon as the druid does. I did not attack any targets, nor do I have a target selected. This holds true for both dungeons when fighting any mob, and in raids when fighting trash. In these circumstances, if you want to pre-hot as a healer, you will have to make sure you are at a considerable distance from players that are in combat, or you will be flagged for combat. If the tank has not attacked any additional mobs, they will likely come right to you. Now in raids, there is another caveat. When fighting raid bosses, the entire raid is put into combat as soon as one player enters combat with that boss. Because of this, I do not recommend pre-hiding as a healer during raid boss encounters unless you are confident that the tank and other players can generate more threat than your heal over time does right away. This is generally the case. However, I can imagine a scenario where the tank misses a few attacks and the boss comes chasing you down. Just be careful and use discretion in these scenarios. Well everyone, that about does it for me. I would like to genuinely know if you learned something from this video, or if you already knew all of these mechanics in the comment section below. I would like to thank Taladrill, Thermophile, and Defcamp for helping to produce this video and for support. Also, thank you patrons and the stream team for your continued support of this channel. Also, make sure to check out the threat guide on ClassicWoW.live if you are hungry for more. The link will be in the description below. Thanks for watching, keep on keybinding and grinding, and I hope to see you in Classic Azeroth.